Video 1 gave a quick idea on how to tell the difference between pickled food versus fermented foods at the grocery store. But do you want to follow Alice down the rabbit hole and discover a new level of differences between fermenting and pickling? Then this video is for you. Let's dive in. Many types of food can be pickled or fermented. Today's video is focusing on the modern context between the two terms, and specifically focusing on the pickling and fermenting of vegetables. Simply put, foods submerged in either a pickling or fermenting brine, also known as the juice, are kept from spoiling. Hence, pickling and fermenting are both food preservation methods. For the preservation method to be effective, the brine needs to have an acidic pH of 4.5. This is a common point for both pickling and fermenting. And now, here are the key differences. Pickled foods use vinegar to make the brine acidic. Fermented foods use a salt brine and rely on a specific type of bacteria to turn it acidic. Vinegar is an acetic acid. The brine in fermentation is a lactic acid. The vinegar used in pickling brine is an instant acid. The salt and bacteria used in a fermenting brine develop into an acid. By the time vinegar enters the picture with pickling, the acid-forming process of the vinegar has finished. It's the opposite with fermenting. When the salt and bacteria come together with fermenting, the acid-forming process is just beginning. This is because the salt added to the brine, along with the brine being oxygen-free, cultivates a lactic acid-forming bacteria, which is what turns the brine acidic. One of the most abundant lactic acid-forming bacteria in a vegetable ferment is called Lactobacillus, hence lacto-fermentation. These lactobacillus bacteria are also called the good guys and probiotics. They are naturally occurring in and on vegetables, so when you're lacto-fermenting, you don't need to use a starter to get the fermentation going like you would with either yogurt or sourdough bread. Now, in case you're wondering if you can lacto-ferment in a vinegar brine, I answer that question in another video. You'll find the link in the description below. Pickling and fermentation methods have been around through every culture for 4,000 plus years. The term pickling is often interchangeably used for both pickling and fermenting, and it can be quite confusing at times. When in doubt, just look at the ingredients. Or just ask for clarification from whoever is talking about the pickle. Do you mean a vinegar pickle or a fermented pickle? And if they don't know, share this video with them. Let's talk more about vinegar pickling. In the 19th century and earlier, one of the most common ways of preserving and storing produce was in vats of vinegar brine that were additionally heavily salted, sweetened, and spiced. That super acidic and oxygen-free environment prevents the survival and growth of pathogens, hence keeping the food preserved. The filled vats, crocks, or barrels were stored in cool cellars for months, since cool temperatures also help hinder bacterial growth. Home picklers and some small vendors still do the heirloom methods that don't require modern technology, but that's just not as common these days as other methods. The self-sealing mason jar came about in the 1850s. And since the mid-20th century, the use of canning has become one of the top modern methods of food preservation. To keep it simple and short, canning is the process of applying heat to food that is sealed in a jar in order to destroy any microorganisms that can cause food spoilage. Thus, the canned food is shelf-stable at room temperature for years to come. All those jars of vinegar pickles on the grocery shelf are canned by the commercial food industry's high-tech, large-volume canning equipment. And mom or grandma's pantry of vinegar pickles are canned with either a water bath or pressure canner. Now, the refrigerator pickle, also known as the quick pickle, is intended for relatively short-term storage in a refrigerator for relatively quick eating and does not require canning since it won't be stored in a pantry at room temperature for years to come. Refrigerator pickles pour brine over the cucumbers packed in a glass jar. Then those jars of cucumbers remain on the countertop anywhere from hours to days, and then are transferred to the refrigerator for storing weeks to months as they are readily eaten. Now, the temperature of the brine, what flavorings are added, and how long it's left on the countertop before being transferred to the fridge depends on the recipe. There are so many methods and variances of pickling, I just can't cover them all. But share in the comments below what your favorite pickling recipe is. Let's shift the focus now to lacto-fermentation. As mentioned earlier, lacto-fermentation is the process of using lactic acid-forming bacteria to preserve foods. Allow me to explain just a little more. The beneficial bacteria break down and feed on the natural carbohydrates and sugars in the vegetable to form lactic acid. And now we've got our acidic brine for effective food preservation. The lactobacillus bacteria are not only acid-producing, but also salt-tolerant and anaerobic, meaning strong salt exposure doesn't bother them, and they don't need oxygen to survive, unlike harmful pathogens that require oxygen for survival and are salt-sensitive. Traditional fermentation will typically salt brine the vegetable and then use a weight to hold it down so it securely remains submerged in the brine, which keeps it safe from spoilage. Fermenting between 60 and 70 degrees is slow enough to develop many of the complex flavors and textures people seek in fermented foods. For example, sauerkraut. The ferment can be ready for eating within 2 to 6 weeks. Temperatures above 70 degrees speed up the fermentation process, resulting in a ferment that's ready to eat much sooner, typically a matter of days. After packing the vegetable mixture into the fermenting vessel like a glass jar or crock, the active ferment is left undisturbed at room temperature until the desired amount of fermentation development has occurred. Then it's moved to someplace cool for storage. This can be short-term, ranging from days to weeks, or long-term that extends many months and in some cases even years. The low temps of cool storage won't actually halt or stop fermentation entirely, but will significantly slow it down as to prevent over-fermentation, where the vegetable turns mushy and/or the flavor is undesirably sour. If proper conditions are met and maintained in a root cellar or another form of natural cold storage, the ferment won't require refrigeration. However, if you're like me and you don't have a root cellar, the ferment will be moved to a refrigerator for either long-term storage or short-term ready eating. Truly, there are literally thousands of fermenting methods and techniques across all cultures around the world. And even in the same culture, fermenting techniques and recipes can vary from household to household. As for my household, I tend to do more short-term refrigerator ferments, fermenting on the countertop anywhere from 1 to 10 days. Then I transfer it to my refrigerator since I typically want to eat the fermentation pretty readily. Not that I don't do a few long-term ferments. In the garden months, I will pack and ferment lots of jars of cabbage and kale and store them with long-term intentions. And well, in regards to kale needs a lot of time, in my opinion, to reach that level of tender and delicious. I mean, at least 4 to 6 months. Sauerkraut, though, gets there a lot faster for me. Now, on the flip side of long-term ferments, I also do quick ferments. Lately, I've been hooked on this 2-day fermented Asian slaw where I use peanut butter in the ferment to make a peanut ginger dressing that acts as the brining liquid. I mean, yikes, it is good. Anyway, there is just an endless spectrum of long to short-term ferment periods, heirloom traditional recipes to trendy recipes. There's truly something for everybody in fermenting. So share in the comments below what your favorite fermenting recipe is. I would love to hear about it. And if you're yet to make your first ferment and you're looking into it, thinking about it, don't be afraid. Fermenting is much easier than you may think. I have a bunch of beginner-friendly fermentation videos, and you can check those videos out in my fermenting playlist on my channel right here. And here's my fermented kale video, which you definitely want to follow it up with its sequel video, Mistakes to Avoid. You can find the link for that in the fermentation playlist. And you gotta try this 2-day lacto-fermented Asian slaw with peanut ginger dressing. It's so good. That video's right here. I'll see you next time. Bye.